Hi, welcome to the next episode of Triggers and Spiritual Medicine. I am Laura Bonetzky-Joseph. I am your host. These podcast episodes, it's really about real talk. We address the elephant in the room to the growing sickness in our society. We address root issues and provide sustainable solutions. We hope by addressing the intersectionality and connect the dots like the web of many of society's challenges, we can help others understand the trauma infection that is impacting all areas of our life: addiction, domestic violence, racism, homelessness, sexual abuse, chronic health issues, cancer, environmental issues, and more. This is a collaborative program, and we hope to share a new perspective of solutions, healing, and resolutions. Each episode, we address a certain trigger while offering the spiritual medicine with at least 3 tips or actionable steps that our listeners can take and implement. Please consider becoming a Patreon member to help our social justice initiatives. And don't forget to please share, like, engage, and follow. A little bit about me. I am a published author, an experienced multi-generational healer and intuitive. I'm a speaker. I'm a spiritual teacher, a social justice warrior, and sacred activist, and survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence. And I help folks who suffer from a history of chronic illness, cancer, trauma, and abuse by addressing root issues, transforming pain, and bridging science, research, and practical magic so we can experience sustainable healing and wholeness by rediscovering the body's ability to heal itself and the power that lies within, so that they and others and we all can become our own superheroes. And I am so excited for our guest today, who is Brighid Murphy, who is probably one of the most rooted, seasoned, experienced healers and thought leaders of today. And I am privileged to call her a friend and a colleague and a mentor. And we're going to be talking about some heavy stuff today. So, but with some serious medicine, because Brighid takes and brings very complicated things and simplifies it for you, and will give you very actionable things on how to become a more productive, better advocate. If you're sitting there, for instance, we're going to be talking about things like, geez, they want to pass a law in South Carolina to make abortion. If you have an abortion, you're going to face a death penalty. And by the way, a miscarriage is considered an abortion. So, because they're going to tell you to prove otherwise. You've got other states that are passing child labor laws, wanting to enforce children working into mines and things like that. There's all these things. So, but we're going to be, how can you show up? I know we're all angry about these things and we don't know what to do. And that's what this episode is going to teach you. So please hang out, please listen, because this is going to be one badass episode. Welcome, Brighid. Please share a little bit about yourself and what brings you here.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me here, Laura. I'm excited to do any work that I get to do with you. So, I'm a healing catalyst and I help people to tune into their power, to move past their pain. I work with folks who have tried all of the alternative therapies and really are still feeling stuck. I help them to eliminate their pain and step into a place of being able to listen to what's going on so they can make the changes that are essentially going to free them. So that's in a nutshell what I do. And I offer one-on-one work and programs and all that jazz. So I'm happy to be here. I'm also very invested in social activism and amplifying marginalized voices, particularly and specifically in the spiritual and the wellness industries. So that's a little bit about me. I'm excited to dive in with you.
Well, thank you. Yes. I mean, I think we call it sacred activism in a lot of channels, right? Because I I was just interviewed, as I was saying earlier before we went on, at a TV station for my books. And I said, you can't be spiritual and say you do spiritual work, if you don't practice sacred activism, like you can't have one without the other, because like, especially like with our teachings, right, even with Japan is one of the teachings with Shintoism, right, it's about you are a steward, and how are you a steward to the world, to all life forms. Just because you might be gifted and you can do things doesn't mean that you can go and basically rape the planet, rape others, rape the animal, all these things, right? And so there's a lot of things happening on the planet right now, astrologically, evolutionary, politically, health-wise, like as we mentioned before, like suicides are up, domestic violence is up like 40%. You've got laws that, like the war on women is full on, full blown, as I mentioned about with South Carolina. And then I think Missouri passed a law that women can't bear arms, like they have to be fully clothed from like and going into government buildings. You can children are getting raped down south and then they're being persecuted. This is like all these things that are happening. And I always say the closer that women are, and here's the plus, we have the Equal Rights Amendment that has been ratified. It has taken decades to get ratified. And this is why I say, I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. I really don't give a rat's ass, because both Trump and Biden are both refusing to publish the Equal Rights Amendment, which would grant women constitutional equal rights. And it stirs up a lot in us, especially like young girls, young boys. There's a lot of confusion, and how do we navigate, especially if we're being bombarded, right, with messages like, I don't care which side, because they both say it, like, oh, the propaganda, oh, like the conspiracy theories, oh, this, oh, that, right? And then you go, how do I know what's true and what's not? So let's just go there, Brighid.
Yes, I think that this is a great segue and a great topic. How do we know what's true and what's not true? First, I think we need to pause and recognize that there's a whole lot of crap out there that isn't ours that we're plugged into. So the first thing that we can do is hold that awareness and choose to bring our focus and our energy and our attention back to us. I see us as humans having natural cords and plugs that go into the things that we're exposed to. We're not always aware that we have plugs going into those things, and we still have plugs going, energetic plugs that go into those things that we're exposed to. So if we want to bring back our power, one of the things we can do is start to bring some of those cords back and withdraw our permission for engaging in a lot of the stuff that is unhealthy. Just bring our cords and our energy back to us, so we're not feeding into the machine that is destructive. That's the first
So,
thing.
so what would you say? Because I'm gonna be the devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
We've got, especially like in the spiritual community, psychics and mediums, and they go, or even others, like doesn't have to be necessarily that group, but it could be others that say, Brighid, you're on fucking crack, lady. Like, what are you talking about? And by the way, spirit told me that this is what we have to do, and we have to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, I already know some of the answer to this, but I want to hear what you have to say, because this is some of the unpacking that I think we don't see that's in our blinders.
Yeah. Well, first, I say, I it doesn't really matter how psychic somebody is, how tuned in they are. We need to listen to what's happening in here and let everybody else listen to what's happening for them. So if people, psychics, mediums, all these people are telling us to do things, we need to find a way to come to our center and say, is that true for me? Do I resonate with that? Because it may be that what is good for those people is not what we're supposed to be doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I remember teaching a class once, a class I used to teach all the time, and it was how to connect to your soul, and the messages and all these things. And what I found was interesting, especially like I have to say, like mediums and psychics, especially, it seemed to be that demographic where they thought they were going in, but they were actually going out. And they were like, well, spirit said, I go, well, it's going out here is not connecting here. So because, and they didn't even realize they were doing it. Like, and I think like when you're saying like, how are we getting centered? How would you know if you're not and you think you are?
How do you know if you're not centered?
How do you know, like, if you say, oh, I'm centered, I'm grounded, like I do this all the time, I listen, but like, like I just gave that example, right? People thought they were, but they were out here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how does somebody know if they are or not?
Well, I think that hopefully folks can feel it in their body
Okay.
if they're connected into the earth. So one of the things that I have people practice is coming into their center, and I ask them, where, when I say find your center, where is it? And often it's in the heart, in the solar plexus, or in the lower belly. And so once you find your center, like breathe from that place and drop into that place, and let's make some conscious choices to be in that place for a while. And then see if some of those things that we hold true are feeling true when we are centered.
Yeah, I guess I know, like when one of the other classes I used to teach was an empath class, and I would say to them, when you're in that place and you're feeling these things, ask, is this even mine? Because if it's not yours,
Mhm.
like this, it will dissipate,
Yeah.
and I think that sometimes, like we were talking before too, like where at least I am geographically, there's a lot of things that are impacting us that are around us. It's unseen, right? That has to do with 400 or 500 years of persecution. And I think I talked about this on the interview that I did at the TV station, where it's like we have yet, where we massacred an entire indigenous tribe to, hanging and persecuting women, to the American Revolution, to, yeah, yes, come on up, slaves. This is free. No, oh, by the way, you're not free. We're going to send you back, right? And all that on this land, that Puritan land that's still here in Massachusetts. But yet we are at the same time, on the flip side of the coin, we just elected our first LGBTQ governor, right? And three other women of power. So it's like we've got both dualities happening at simultaneously. And
Yes.
how do we differentiate that navigation, right? And that truth serum?
We have to make a practice and make it a priority to come back to our center again and again and again. We have to become like trees, anchored in the earth and anchored in what is much larger than us. So we have a pipeline to the wisdom sources that are bigger than our egos. And
Mm.
I've experienced those wisdom sources to be from the roots, from the earth, from the trees, and also from the sun and from the stars. Yeah. So
So what do you find to be the biggest challenge? And when I know you've been teaching these practices for over 20 years now, so what have you found to be the biggest challenge folks experience?
the biggest challenge that people experience is not going to sound like that big of a deal. And after 20 years of instructing people how to find their center, the biggest challenge is finding a regular time of day to practice some introspection, some stillness. We might call it meditation, but it doesn't have to be in complete quiet. You can sit and sing or hum to yourself or use some movement. The biggest challenge is consistent committing to a consistent 5 minutes a day for oneself. That's people's biggest challenge.
And how does one, like, what is your, so what do you say to somebody outside? Say, well, you got to commit.
Yeah.
So what is, how does somebody shift that? Like, what are some of the things that happen up here for that person to shift and understand that it's actually easier than you think, right? In a way it is. It's just it's a shift.
Yeah. I think that what it is a willingness to be uncomfortable and to wait it out, to move through the uncomfortability to the peace that exists on the other side of the
Mm.
uncomfortability.
I think
Because
you
from,
just,
yeah,
I was gonna say, I think you just said it right there, because I know for me in my in my path, sitting actually was very triggering. And then my anxiety and everything else. And then it was like distraction mode. It was like that fight, flight, freeze started kicking in. And it was like, nope, you can't do that, Laura. And it was a lot of getting back, bringing yourself back, staying present, and I know for me, I sometimes tell my clients, my hands on the steering wheel, I am driving.
yeah, yeah. That reminds that, you know what? You and I are aligned in a lot of ways.
I know.
I I tell
There's
my
different ways of
people,
doing it.
yes. I tell my people, okay, who's running your show? I'm running my show over here. When I start spinning and getting anxious or doing whatever I do as a human, I say, stop. This is my show. I get to choose how to run this show. And so, yeah, put your hands on the steering wheel. You're driving the car. Yeah.
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 Because I go, because a lot of people, when they drive to my place and they go, well, what were you thinking? And they go, well, this was happening and that was happening. I go, yeah, but were you actually feeling the handlebar? Like, were you actually feeling the steering wheel, feeling the texture? Were you actually seeing what was on the road? Like all that staying present, right? And I think, and I learned that going to Deer Valley in California, to Thich Nhat Hanh's monastery. And it was so fascinating how to bring in everyday mindfulness, but yet we go, oh, we don't have time for that. Well, yes, you do. It's just that we have been conditioned to, especially women, to be like, I got to think of 4 different things. And if I'm not stressed out like a stress rag, then I'm not a productive human being. Like,
Yeah.
think how absurd that sounds.
It's hustle culture. It's hustle culture. Do it fast, do it now, do it 3 times, do it, do 5 things at once, keep yourself busy, make it happen. It's a lot of pressure. It's hustle culture. Yeah.
So what, and I know a lot of us in the industry are really addressing that. And how do we unpack that hustle culture?
Yeah.
So from folks that come to you, because I'm already hearing like in my head from just clients and, but Laura, I'm a single parent, or I've got, like I met somebody yesterday who said that they're already burnt out because they're a nanny for people that are single parents, and they've got a very high demanding job. And it's like, how do we reel that in and unpack that when at the same time we still have to have a roof over our heads, put food on the table?
Well, I mean, I'm going to go back to my simple response that I've been telling people for years. Slow down. And I have like practical um, suggestions for how to do that. Slow down and spend 5 minutes a day. Five often turns into 10, but 5 minutes is all you need. No screens, no ringers and dingers, to be present. And you can breathe, you can sing, you can stand on your head. 5 minutes a day, every day, or as close to every day as you can possibly do. After a month, things will shift for you. So, committing to having time to yourself to open the space for some quiet will change you. That's how to do it. And then there's all these other things that you can do to support yourself and to have accountability for that, and join groups, take workshops. And when it comes down to it, it's between me, my heart, and my soul, and the universe. And 5 minutes a day is all it takes to make that loop and make that connection.
So what do you say to somebody? How, sometimes, like, I know we both worked with similar populations, at various different times. What do you say, especially to those that say, I get it up here. I get it up here. But for some reason, when I go here, like how I said earlier, like in my early path, right? It was like it actually triggered like a PTSD episode where
Yeah.
it was like, I wanted to go here, or I wanted to go there. Or I needed to go be distracted by something. And I think And I think we are a culture right now of PTSD because of what has happened, or else we wouldn't have the mental health crisis, and everything is just like straw right now, ready to break.
Yeah.
And it's like, and people don't want to see the break, right? And sometimes you have to have the, and it's like, well, if you can't control it, stop trying. I would say, stop trying to control the outcome, right? Because you have to stop trying, in order to listen, you have to stop trying to control. It's the surrender. And, but I wanted to see like what your perspective is on that when somebody was saying, I'm trying, Bridget, but like I get it here, but somehow I can't get it here.
Okay. So I think that when we're too much up here and we're not able to get here, we need to shift into a different mode. So then I would suggest that we go to our bodies
Mhm.
and we engage our physical bodies instead of trying to engage our brains. And what I would say, I would give folks a tool, a physical tool to work with for that 5 minutes a day. So I had a client a couple years ago. He was maybe in his early 30s, and we were doing some healing treatments. And he came to me for stress relief. And I suggested some meditation. And he said, no, 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 I can't meditate. I have ADD. It doesn't work. Da, 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 da. And I said, okay, well, meditation can look different than you think it can. Take these. And I handed him two small shakers, two more small rattles. And I said, spend 5 minutes a day playing with these. And then let's talk. And he came back to me a week later and he said, I said, how did it go? And he said, it went great. I really got into them. And he started to find a pathway to that 5 minutes a day, which is a form of meditation, using his body, engaging his body. Took him
Mm.
out of his brain, put him into his body and into a rhythm that he could work with. So that's what I would say for people who are too up here and they can't, like, do something that's going to get you in your body, whether it's coloring, shaking rattles, doing some crocheting, some knitting, some woodwork, something that will take your focus off your brain and put you in your body. That would be my suggestion.
Perfect, perfect. And how would, especially like we were talking about all this stuff that's happening, how would this be a power using and learning how to harness this as a power to be able to shift what you desire in the world, especially culturally, politically, healing, all these things?
Well, it's a power because when you can spend some time to yourself, you start to
Mhm.
become in your own power. And when you're in your own power, you can then hear, listen, and respond instead of react. You can make better choices and you can calm and soothe yourself so that you can get to a place to make better choices much more easily. So that power is your ability to be in your own power.
Mm. And how do you see that with our upcoming election coming up next year, and with Pluto in Aquarius, which we know is like very revolutionary, right? What would you recommend folks to do? What would be something that you can say that they can do to make sure that they are in alignment with who they are and their choices moving forward, especially with this political spectrum that we see, this kind of circus that we have going
Mm-hmm.
on? That impacts, we don't realize sometimes how our decision also impacts,
Yeah.
like we both work with vulnerable, marginalized
Yeah.
communities. So and those are the ones that a lot of times are impacted and we don't hear about it on the news.
Yes. Yes. So being in your center is one way to make better choices. And when we're making choices, asking ourselves, is this good for everybody? Is this choice something that somebody who's in an identity that's not mine is going to benefit from? Is this political person, if we're talking politics, going to help people who have less privilege than me? Asking, is this good for everybody? And like making a decision based on what's good for everybody And thinking about people's differences and different needs and acting from that place, I think, is one of the keys.
And I think what people don't realize, when we act from a place of whole like that, that means other, and if we just magnify that, you do that, I do that, our neighbor does that, their neighbor does that, we get our needs met. Our needs are met, right?
Yes.
And I always say, like, how, what areas, and this is part of the listening I've been doing, is what inner misogyny do I still need to unpack? What inner patriarchy do I still need to unpack? What inner racism do I still need to unpack? What inner colonialism do I still need to unpack? And listening to the body and not getting defensive. Well, I'm not racist. I'm not a misogynist. It has nothing to do with your intentions. It has to do with a culture of how we've been conditioned and raised that has instilled things in us that are not in alignment with our beliefs. We think we're in alignment with our beliefs, but when we start really unpacking these things, we start going, oh, like I look back, like when I was a teenager, I go, yes, I'm just as good as a boy. I was raised like a tomboy because I was the oldest. My father wished he had a son as the oldest. So I was raised very much like a man. I can be just as productive, just as successful as a man. And then to realize that that was not true. And that was actually a very false sense of security. And I used to shame women because I'm like, oh, get your fucking shit together. Like, like you freaking crybaby, backstabbing, gossiping, whatever. And not to realize, because I didn't realize because of how I was raised. I was raised, even though I was born a certain sex, I was raised as a different sex, so to speak. And so when I got smacked down, I had to go and look at all those places of how I may have harmed others, not knowingly thinking I harmed. So this happens from a lot of times a place of innocence, not of malice. And I think that is the misconception. Like when we say we have to unpack things, we think like the things we have to unpack was done with malice. And it's not always done with malice. Like this whole war on women, like I've been really sitting with, with our other colleague there, Ray Carter, when she was talking about how the burning times of women influence white women culture today. And I'm like going, oh shit, like no wonder especially white folk feel like we got to do this. Why white women feel like we're threatened if a woman talks to our husbands. Why another woman who is in a position of power, like, well, they're a bitch. Like, why do we feel this way? Because it's not like we learned it in school. It is packed in 500 years of conditioning in our DNA that we have to unpack. And so some of the listening comes there too, right? What would somebody get if they were to sign up? I know you talked about a lot of your sacred listening. I know you do a lot of other things too, but what would somebody benefit from learning some of the courses that you do on this topic? And how would they benefit?
Yeah, they're going to learn. They learn to drop into a place where the information that they need exists. So anything from the inner answers to the inner guidance to the messages that the cells in their bodies are trying to give them is information that they receive. There's also a deep peace that comes from these practices. And from we start with ourselves and then we spread it out. When we learn to listen to our soul and our body, we can then learn to listen to nature and the outer world. And then we can start to listen to information that's coming from the greater knowing, and we can listen to what is needed from people on the planet who are telling us what we need to do to shift the planet. If we can
How to show
listen to
up.
ourselves, then we can listen to some of the people who already know how to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the key, right? A lot of times we just freeze, right? We'll get overwhelmed with all the chaos happening. And I see this with a lot of people. They get overwhelmed. They go, but I can't do anything. Yes, we can, more than we think, but it's not in the way you think.
Yeah.
right?
And it doesn't have to be so challenging. Um, I was on a podcast the other day, and a fellow was asking me, like, what do we need to do to change the world? And I think he was expecting me to have some sort of like oneness consciousness concept that I shared. And what I shared was simply get your hands behind the backs of marginalized people, people of color, indigenous people, transgender folks, people who are on the fringes, people who have disabilities or who are differently abled. Go support them. Support the work and the movement that's already there. And that liberates all of us. Anybody can do that. Anybody can look up an organization that amplifies Indigenous voices. Anybody can look up an organization that supports trans youth. Anybody can look up an organization that's already making change in the world and go join it. Go support them financially. Go find out what you can do to amplify the voices that are already doing the work. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
No, no, you don't. On that note, what would, you come with a lot of experience and a lot of training. And what would you say? I think we saw like a divide in the spiritual community after the last 4 or 5 years, right? And there's a lot of what I like to really kind of address is the whitewashing, the and the well, I can because I can, or I just became woke and now all of a sudden I'm an expert. And and really, um what would you say to lead them back to understanding that they are a piece to a larger puzzle?
Yeah. And I'm thinking you're talking about people who are live in dominant identities.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Primarily,
I
yes.
yeah. I think that quieting, like zipping the lips, listening and finding out the best ways to support marginalized identities or identities that are less marginalized than you is the way to go.
Hmm.
And I realized that along the path of waking up or what wokeness, like there are missteps, there are stumbles. I make them, like I'm still in the process of waking up, right? And being willing to recognize, being able to recognize when that's happening and take responsibility for when we mess up and learn from it and keep going. I think that's important. Um,
So can you describe to me, I mean, I would like to hear your definition of it. If, when we do this work, right, how would you define what sacred activism is?
yeah.
Because we see a lot of people that are in churches and religious groups and they have little potlucks and maybe they feed the homeless and they do all these other things, right? But what's sacred activism and how is that different?
I think that it starts here. It starts with us doing our own work. To really do work as an activist, some folks need to like do their own work and unpack their own privilege, their own internalized misogyny, as you mentioned, and really like take a look at the stuff that's uncomfortable. That's a place to that's a place to start. Um, and reaching out from that place, recognizing that the work, okay, so the work starts in here. What makes activism sacred is when we understand the connection, the interwovenness, the interrelation between all that is and the way that we walk in the world, and welcoming that those forces, whatever it is that we call them, in to help us do our own work and then help us get centered and then move forward. So using, and in a good way, our connection to the sacred as fuel to feed whatever piece of activism we're involved in.
And to make sure that we talk about activism, it's not activism in a way that supports supremacy. It's activism that supports the whole,
Yes.
not an exclusive group. I just want to
Yeah.
clarify with that because there's a fine line sometimes when we go, well, I'm a sacred activist and I'm doing this, and but it's like very white supremacy and very misogynistic, you know. And so I just wanted just to clarify that. What are three things you think folks can do today to start this path? What are three things they can do right here, right now, to show up in the world better?
Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to say is spend 5 minutes a day to yourself doing something that's soothing. You can call it meditation, you can call it quiet time, 5 minutes a day on a regular basis. The
And the
second
key
thing,
is regular basis. Like it's
regular,
not what you do, it's the consistency. I think you're
yes,
right. Like that's the missing piece.
yeah, as regular as possible.
Yeah.
Nobody is perfect. As regular as possible. The second thing, and these are in no particular order, the second thing that I think is important is to learn to be in a reciprocity, be in a reciprocal relationship with people, with nature, with anything that's living. And when I say reciprocity, I mean there's a lean in and a lean back to receive. So a lean in and an inquiry, tell me more about what's going on, and a lean back and a receiving of whatever is being offered, whether that's from the tree in the park or the human being that you're having trouble with or the group of folks that you're volunteering for and trying to help. Lean in, ask, and then zip it up and listen. That will make a big difference. So many people want to help, and they want to help from their agenda, that what they think, they want to do what they think is going to be helpful. And to really be helpful, we need to actually listen to what's being asked of us from the trees, from the waters, from the humans, from the marginalized groups. We need to be in reciprocity. And reciprocity is lean in, lean back. So that's the second thing.
Mhm.
And the third piece, which I mentioned already, is putting our hands at the backs, supporting people who are already doing really deep, good work on the planet. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to support people and organizations that are doing the good work.
And I think I would like to add, if I may, I don't know if you're seeing it with your community, but I'm seeing it here where a lot of individuals are having struggles with their own families and they feel tied and they feel stuck and it's become either volatile. And I would say family doesn't always have to be blood, number one.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, it is okay to create distance and space
Mm-hmm.
so you can work on you and you can
Mm-hmm.
still love your family. You can still show up. But when you can create that space and that time so you can take back your power, get centered, get grounded. So when you go back to like those family gatherings that might be a little toxic, you know how to handle yourself in a much more effective manner where it doesn't deplete you or
Yes.
make you feel bad about yourself.
Yes. There are simple practices that people can do to bring themselves into their center and be in their power before they engage with family or any human being or group of people that might be triggering to them.
How would how would somebody be able to reach out to you, Brighid?
Yeah, folks can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, or my website, and everything is under my name, Brighid Murphy, brigidmurphy.com or Brighid Murphy Healing. That's my handle on.
Can you make sure you spell Brighid for them because not everybody spells it the same way?
Yes, B as in boy, R as in Roger, I, G as in George, H as in Harry, I, D as in dog.
Fabulous.
Brighid.
Right.
Murphy. It's pretty standard, Murphy. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification, because you're right. There's a lot of different ways to spell Bridget.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it was always is a joy, and I would just like to say, if you're struggling out there, take a breath, take a pause. Bridget's got some amazing programs. Check her out. Check out even prior podcasts and other guests and see what resonates with you. And if you like this, please leave a comment, please share, because this takes community. And make sure you also, if you like these, please become a Patreon supporter. Have a great day, everybody. Until next time.